I can hear.
Okay. All set, Tom.
We're good? All right. Well, first, thanks for coming down and being with us this afternoon. We appreciate it a lot. And we're just going to start. What we need for the city is we need for you to tell us your name and then to spell your name after you tell us your name, if you would. We'll start here if we may.
Ruth Love, RUTHLOVE.
And John Ruehl, JOHNRUEHL.
And again, the city wants us to ask you, what are your preferred pronouns? Are you a he or a she?
She. Except when I'm an it.
He, him, his.
Thank you. That's great. And then, if it's okay, what I thought I'd do just to start, you know, our intent here today is to learn more about how people's faith life influences the way they choose to live in our community and contribute to the good things that go in our community. So those are the stories we've been listening for over the past 3 sessions. I think a good way to start this is just to learn a little bit about each of you personally, and then we'll move more into some of the questions that are more directed, more specific in that way. Ms. Love, I'd just be curious, if you wouldn't mind, a little bit about kind of where you were born, where you grew up, where you were schooled, just kind of, you know, your life journey a little bit, please.
I was born in Savannah, and I lived on Huntington Street, West Huntington Street. At the time I was a child, that was the slums. But I didn't know it because my grandparents and parents both had jobs. And my grandmother, from the time I was little, I knew that you had to give back. I was never allowed to take without being ready to reciprocate.
And that was just part of the way you were raised.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they were Baptists. Went to Calvary Baptist when it was on West
Barn.
Montgomery Street,
Uh-huh.
Montgomery Street.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And by the time I was coming along, there was a little, they had moved, and there was a little Baptist church across the street from us.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother was not able to go to church, but she made sure I got there every Sunday, even as I got older.
Do you remember the name of that little Baptist church?
Tolliver.
And are you a public school kid or a private school kid?
Oh, public school.
And what schools did you go to? If you don't
I
mind
went to
asking?
Barnard Street School,
Gosh.
and then we moved into the country, and I went to Pooler for 2 years, and then Groves for a year, and then I graduated from Savannah High.
Mm-hmm. You graduated in
61.
61. Thank you. Brothers and sisters?
I had 2 sisters and a brother who was 12 years older than I am.
Mm-hmm. Are you the baby?
No, I was 2. I was the second.
You were the second. I got you. Now, what about you?
Yeah, so I was born on Long Island, New York. And then my parents got divorced when I was 2, and my mom, as an effort to kind of start over, moved myself and my 3 sisters to Central Florida, to her parents' kind of vacation home in DeLand, Florida. She went back to school to get her master's in school counseling. And so that's where I was raised, DeLand, Florida. Public school as well, DeLand High School. And then after high school, started out as a music major, got a vocal scholarship. But soon found out that really wasn't my passion. And so went back to the drawing board and ended up with a dual degree in philosophy and social science, which I received from University of West Florida in Pensacola. And so after college, ended up pursuing a sense of call into ministry, which led me to first the ITC, which is a historically African American seminary in Atlanta, part of the AUC. So I spent a year there and then transferred and finished at Columbia Theological Seminary, which is the Presbyterian school in Atlanta. And most recently just finished my doctor of ministry degree from Drew University in Madison, New Jersey.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
on
Thank you.
that.
Yeah.
And then, so you are now pastoring
Mm-hmm.
at White Bluff Presbyterian, right?
Right. White Bluff Presbyterian.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've been a member for
55 years, more or less.
more or less, give or take, right? And then how did you wind up at Presbyterian on White Bluff Road? How'd that happen?
Well, my husband was Lutheran. I was Baptist. He knew the pastor. He had grown up with the son. And White Bluff just was right. It was where we needed to be, because we really needed a compromise.
Gotcha. Right. So a Lutheran and a Baptist equal a Presbyterian.
Right.
Got it. Okay. The church is in a transition now,
Right.
right? And so, John, I want you to talk about that a little bit, how the church is in transition.
Mm-hmm.
And then I want to circle back and understand more about where it came from. But I'd like to start with the transition part now, and then we'll come back and kind of fill in if we could.
Yeah, well, transition is a good word because that's the title that I'm serving under as transitional pastor. There was a long-serving pastor who was here for 12 years, Reverend Eric Bean, and he left in 2020, right? Is it 2020? And then they had an interim pastor that came in to kind of work with the congregation to move with what they were used to into what might be next. And in that season, in those 2 years, COVID, kind of came in. Critical look was turned to the church and the congregation, and the changes in demographics in the community and other things. So there were a lot of really sobering, difficult conversations being had, which came kind of to the conclusion of change or die as a congregation. In the 90s or so, the church had hundreds of members, but over time, people moving, people dying, splits in our denomination, all kinds of contributing factors, kind of led to a place where that conversation was necessary. And so that's kind of the framework of my entering in with them was, all right, so there's two main focus points of this conversation. Where do you really feel like we are? Is dying as a congregation with intention, which is a faithful thing to do? Is that where you are, or are we curious enough about what change could look like to play with that a little bit?
And so you're having that conversation in this moment, or is that conversation kind of being concluded and you've picked the path?
We're heading in a direction that feels like a contextual, grounded kind of change. But we're certainly not out of the woods of the implications of that conversation. But we're tracking toward seeing what change can look like, and with that forward momentum, there's a shared sense of potential and new life.
So, Ms. Love, as a 55-year member, you have a deep history in the congregation and how the congregation has been,
Mm-hmm.
and now at the age of 80, you're part of this conversation about where are we and where are we trying to go.
Right. And at the beginning of all this, I wouldn't have given you 2 cents for us making it. I really, and my friends kind of felt the same way, that it just, we were horrified, but we didn't know what we were going to do. And John has been such a blessing. He doesn't think necessarily the way we do, but he motivates people to do things that you might not expect. Obviously, I'm here, but but we've had some ups and downs, some bitterness, but White Bluff has always been a family church. I don't remember a time when we didn't feel that way, and we were not ever closed to outreach. Sometimes it was a struggle, and everybody doesn't agree all the time, but once a decision is made, most of us support it whether we really like it or not, because it's our church. It's what we're told to do, taught to do.
Let me ask then, if you could, over these 50 years you've been a member, if you could talk a little bit about maybe the heyday of the church. I mean, when the church was in its, to your eye, kind of its glowing moments, and then particularly if there might be times in those moments when the church played a particularly important role, maybe in the immediate community, or maybe in the larger city, and kind of how that. Let's talk about that, because we're going to talk about this new direction in a minute.
All right. We had a minister who was, well, he's about my age, a little younger, and he was a minister and a pastor, and and we were, 250 members, and he was there for 13 years, I think. And during that time, we were charter members of the Interfaith Hospitality, which is now Family Promise. And we stayed. I never was on the board, but I was always involved. And we had a rocky start. It took 2 or 3 years to get it really going. But and we built a educational building that's too big now. And but it is. There was all kinds of outreach. And before that, even in the early 70s, we were pretty big because of the military. We had, during Vietnam, a couple of our members were killed in Vietnam, and their families were here one for several years, and one family lived here. And we had a good outreach then, to the military. And I do think we're a welcoming congregation.
Mm-hmm.
We, really, we've just gotten old and dying. That's a big part of it.
Times change, and people change, and the institution of the congregation, there's a choice to be made, and this is what's going to happen
Right.
here. I'd be curious, you're mentioning in the 70s, Vietnam War, that sort of thing. This congregation, as I understand it, several Vietnamese families were bootstrapped into this country because if they didn't get here, they would be killed.
Yes, we sponsored a Vietnamese family. They worked. One of our families had shrimp boats, and they were able to come and do the shrimp boats. And but it was only one family, and then several years later, a Indian family. The son had scoliosis, severe, and he was going to die because he couldn't breathe. And he came here and to have the surgery. And they lived in the old manse for several years, year and a half, I guess.
Well, you said it was a family church, and
It is.
both the examples you've given here have to do with family life. So, it seems to me it's really that's like a theme,
Right.
that we're a family church. And then, just so our listeners can know, the Interfaith Hospitality Network, as I understand it, that was an opportunity for families that were homeless, women who had children who were homeless, to get out of the street and have a
Right.
place to sleep.
There
and
was
be safe.
no place for families. And even if you had a child of a different sex, you couldn't bring a 5-year-old in with the women or with the, and that, it started somewhere, Texas, I think. But that was the reasoning.
So that was the problem that had to be solved.
Right.
And White Bluff Pres stepped up and said, we can help solve this problem.
Right. And I was the coordinator, contact person for, I don't know, 10 years probably.
How was the pay?
Double or nothing. It was very, very satisfying to be able to do it.
Let's talk a little bit about what you're going through now and let's talk a bit about what's caused you to have to really ask some hard questions and have hard conversations, and then where you think this has taken you. And John, you might want to I imagine you've been the convener of a lot of this, and maybe the brunt of some of it. So I'll let you take the lead on this if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm thankful for really the work that was started before I got there. Reverend Kathy Parcham was here for 2 years and brought the congregation kind of to that place of seeing clearly that those were the two, real options for what was directly in front of them. And I'm also thankful for how I've been welcomed in and embraced with what I have to offer in the broader conversation. So really haven't felt much the brunt of anything just yet. Maybe we're just in the honeymoon period, and so
After 2 years.
I know, yeah. So we'll see, but as it happens, I had already started with my doctorate of ministry, pursuing that, and the framework of that degree is a study of the ministry context. So it lent itself to kind of the conversations that were already at work within White Bluff Presbyterian Church. And what I brought into that conversation was training I had had previously. I have a graduate certificate in community organizing and pastoral leadership in a kind of a combined way between Next Church, which is an effort within the broader PCUSA Presbyterian denomination, and Johnson C. Smith, which was one of the constituent schools of the ITC, historically black seminary. So I went through that certificate training, learned about a model called asset-based community development, which involves learning how to take a look at the things that a community has in its hand instead of starting from a place of deficiency. What's wrong, or what are our barriers. Being curious in the beginning of the conversation, what do we have in our hands? What can we build on? And so there's a discipline called asset mapping. You start taking a look at everything from property to relationships to organizations that folks are associated with, relationships. Looking across all the sectors of people's lives and the intersections, the networks, and start listing those things as a tool to integrate, making use of those things to create forward momentum for the community. And so my doctor of ministry project then was bringing asset-based community development into conversation with White Bluff Presbyterian Church, which we haven't got to say yet, was founded in 1737. People who came over on the boat with Oglethorpe established White Bluff Presbyterian Church. And the land that we're still on was officially granted by King George in 1745. So we have a copy of the land grant, 2 acres of land on that side of Savannah. So my doctoral work was curious about asset-based community development, a historical congregation across many generations, involved in various ways in the broader conversation of what Savannah is and can become, and so we've worked with all those things to try to work on creating some forward momentum within the congregation that feels grounded in who they feel like they are.
So I'm going to see if I understand what you're telling me. So you've used this idea that comes out of asset-based community development called asset mapping, and you've been listening for when it comes to people, place, other assets. You've been gathering those and listing and collecting those and trying to understand the implication of that.
Right.
Okay. And so this is under this broad frame of faith in action. This is the action that you're in right now, is trying to understand better who we are through our strengths.
Correct.
And our capacities. How
we see ourselves, what kind of connections we already have, what can be worked on and fostered along to create forward momentum. An example of that I'd raise was the previous connection with Family Promise. In the time that I've been working with White Bluff, now we've entered into an intentional relationship with them, with their clients are spending the night in one of our buildings. So it's a static location for their clients. So they're renting space from us, and we're also entered into a relationship with Inspiritus, which used to be Lutheran Services. Locally, they work with families who are refugees and immigrants, and trying to help them navigate, coming from wherever they're coming from around the world. to learn about what it means to live where we are and be active members in the society. So very much, family-oriented efforts. We also have a Boy Scout troop, Troop 30. It's historic at the church. And so really we're working to create kind of a hub of service and support in our community.
The original church was known as a meeting house. And because of that, when things started going crazy, to use the building, we opened it to Tybee Lighthouse people. About 8 or 9 different communities meet.
So the space has become a hub, and that gives those organizations a chance to do the business they need to do.
Right.
Right.
I'm guessing you do not charge them for the space.
This is by donation.
It's by donation,
so, I
just
mean,
to
as-
pay for the
yeah,
electricity.
as people can. And I mean, we can certainly see that as ministry,
and
particularly if you run a small organization like I have, where you need people that will give you space and let you use their space.
And Alcoholics Anonymous meets there. We have line dancing.
Paradise Park, Oakhurst Neighborhood Association, Vernonburg City Council meets there. We just had Asbury United Methodist Church, which is a historically black congregation whose building on Abercorn became not conducive to holding church.
It was
So-
falling.
So they planted in our congregation for
They
a
have-
year now.
They use the Sunday school building.
Well, this to
For
me
their
brings up
service.
sort of an interesting question. When I think about White Bluff Presbyterian, or just think about the South Side, this is me. I think about white people because it got settled post World War II, and it was the suburbs. It was a bunch of white people.
It is not that anymore.
Let's talk about that. I mean, how does that change the role that the church plays in the community? And are y'all figuring that out? And who's been hostile? And let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, we haven't encountered any hostilities around that issue, but 2 blocks away from White Bluff Presbyterian is Zion White Bluff Baptist, which is I know they're over 200 years old as a Baptist church, and they have a cemetery behind their church, and we have a cemetery behind our church. Very close land relations. So what I see historically is it's likely that the folks who were landowners, who were members of our church, had some enslaved folks who started the church 2 blocks away, and perhaps are buried in that cemetery there. Meanwhile, you have White Bluff that is a community, but it's not an island. We're closely related with Coffee Bluff, which has its own historic identity as people who were formerly displaced from St. Catherine's Island under the 40 acres and the mules issues that happened over there. They came to take residence in Coffee Bluff, just down the road from where we are. So a lot of historical, neighbors walking through history.
We've had and do have black members.
Yeah.
We even church even accepted biracial marriage, and
Like early in the 80s.
in the 80s, yeah. And the wife was black, and she was an elder at White Bluff. So even then, I don't mean that it was all roses, but those of us who were open to it were able to control or whatever those who were not.
Maybe they weren't influenced.
Right.
Work.
Right.
How is the Hispanic community showed up, or is it showing up at White Bluff, or do you feel there's an opportunity there, or, I mean, the demographics, particularly on the south side, seem like they're changing dramatically.
That's it. There's a flow of people, some folks displaced from West Side, Savannah, finding a place to be in South Side. Various groups coming in, including, the refugee population that is serviced through Inspiritus. The reason we've entered into a relationship with them is because a lot of their clients happen to be taking up residence in the apartments down the road from us. So the location.
They walk. They don't have cars.
So
a lot of them.
Hispanic, various countries in Africa. So some Ukrainian, South America.
So the
Hispanic and Latinx.
The neighborhood's becoming a little international center.
There's a lot there. Yeah.
And you're right there in the neighborhood.
We're in the neighborhood.
And so there's a lot of opportunity for faith in action.
Yes.
But it sounds like you've got to figure out what that might look like going forward. I mean, is that kind of where you are?
Yes.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Are there other congregations in the city that you feel like have had to move through this transition already, where they've had to let go of who they were to become who they need to be?
I suspect that most churches, and I'll make this claim from a theological point of view, that particularly on this side of the COVID shutdowns, any church that wants to be viable really should be taking a look at, patterns and where we've all been. Take a true look at where we are in our identity and place, and who's around us, who are our neighbors, and listen with fresh ears about what it means to love our neighbors as we do the work of loving ourselves too. Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it that way, so now you're talking about, quite frankly, survival on both sides of the coin. I'm talking about survival of the congregation as a congregation, but also some people's survival as people who are vulnerable and who are marginalized.
Yeah.
And there's something there, if I understand you right.
Yes.
That's where the action is.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, I think that's an essential part of the way that I try to articulate the gospel, is that a big part of what we hold in common turns around our vulnerabilities. It's where we meet is less about kind of the facades we tend to hold up to impress one another, but more about our frailties, our vulnerabilities, our brokenness, our struggles. That has a lot of potential to lift up our humanity and create holy ground where people can really engage with other people.
Well, it sounds like you're not having to look too far past your nose to see what needs to be done. It's right there in front of you, it sounds like.
But you have to know how to do it. And you can't just go out and... I read something the other day. People were bringing sandwiches to the homeless. Well, they had plenty of food. They didn't need food. They needed underwear, or they needed something else. And I think we have to do that. We have to forget about the way we've always done it that way. That has to be gotten rid of and move forward in a different way, but continue to serve and to be a part of the community and to support your faith. I like James, the book of James, a lot because, it doesn't it tells you that you're saved by grace, but you need and you owe it to your belief to get out there and do stuff. You don't just sit home and think, oh, I'm saved. Because that, and work does not get you saved. But because your beliefs are strong, then you want to do as you were directed.
And that is faith in action.
Hmm. I hope so. I mean,
Well, Ms. Love, when you walked in, I did not imagine you as a change agent, but the way you just described where you are and what has to be done in the letting go of the past, I mean, you are a change agent.
and the older I get, the less I care about what was. And the more I want to prepare myself and others for what's to come. And it's really scary right now. But we've got to change or we're going to die. I mean, we're all going to die. But
It's kind of funny because we come from a tradition in the Presbyterian Church that makes a claim. We have an unofficial motto that says the church reformed and always being reformed according to the Word of God. But meanwhile, Presbyterians in particular are often called the frozen chosen. so it's kind of a comedic tension that exists there.
and the favorite phrase is, well, we've always done it that way.
Yeah, it's yeah.
And that's not going to work anymore.
No.
And you know that. And you've been there 50 plus years.
Yes, and I try to preach it. Not from the pulpit. I don't want to get in the pulpit, but in the meetings, and I run my mouth in ways that most people don't appreciate, maybe. But somebody's got to say it.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to get away with it.
The clothes don't get clean without an agitator, right?
There it is.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, this has been a different interview for us in a way. It's been a more reflective interview, which is interesting because, again, because you're in transition and you're not quite sure where you're headed, but you know you got to go there.
Right.
And so it's interesting. And again, in this context, I mean, your congregation, when you think about many of the things you've done, have always centered around family. And now this notion of let's look at our strengths, not our weaknesses, but let's look at our strengths and the strengths that surround us. And let's begin to think more deeply about what that might mean in terms of how our congregation on this piece of land that was granted in 1737, right?
The grant was 1745.
1745,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. How this piece of 2-acre land and all that is around it has changed repetitively. Congregation has held its spot, and now you're in this moment where we've got to think really quickly and deeply post-COVID about how do we change.
Mm-hmm.
And that is faith in action.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a different set of actions coming forward.
Right.
Yeah. Very interesting. Do you guys have questions you want to put in, or?
I think we've covered the ground.
Okay, I do too.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when I asked John if he would be willing to do this, and he said yes. And if I asked if he'd bring someone who had been in the congregation for a long time, I mean, this is really part of what I hope we could bring forward.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Is this notion?
To have something that's happening real. This is a real thing that's happening now, and that's a lot different than a lot of the other stuff that we've been doing. We've been doing about back there and whatever, and, you know, all these things, but there's nothing, not so much focus on what's now and what's needed.
Well, it's the analysis too, like the looking at your reason for being
Mm.
and trying to determine, you know, what that really is, coming to a consensus within the congregation of
Right.
what does that mean
Yep.
going forward, right? And what changes will come, which won't change that,
Right. Yeah.
So like, how do you mesh those two things together? I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. There's important questions that you guys are asking, and sounds like you're coming up with some good answers too.
We're trying.
It's a struggle, I know.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the King's Grant, they were going to bring Truman Parkway through us, through White Bluff Presbyterian,
Yeah.
and they couldn't because it was we had the King's Grant. So they moved it down to the Methodists. That was the next opening. But we fought that for several years, really.
So we have a historical marker that helps with that.
Again, there's something about real estate.
Yep.
They call it real estate for a reason. It's real.
Right.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
Now, do you live close by the church?
Yes. I had lived on Edgewater Road, and I was about a mile from the church. We have moved into a elderly friendly apartment, but it's like another half mile from. So literally, we have been, you know, I have gone to the church at 2:00 in the morning to flip an alarm or to let the scouts in because they lost their keys or they were late getting back from something. So we're that close. And my husband has been active too. He's not so much now, but
Could somebody call you maybe the church mother?
oh, they call me some things. I don't know about mother. Maybe mother. But I was incapacitated for 2 years, and I cannot tell you how I missed the church. I had sciatica and couldn't walk. And I literally was not there for 2 years. But I got lots of phone calls about where is this and what's that and that kind of thing.
Can we bring you something? Right.
Yes, and lots of that.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're
Went both ways.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all both for coming, and particularly, I know on a Friday afternoon at 4:00. I mean,
Well, getting home's just going to be the problem.
Well, I don't disagree. and if y'all get out here a little before 5, it's going to make it a lot easier. I can
Yeah.
Right.
promise that. So
Right.
there is that.
You just do like I do, going to Richmond Hill, you just pull over, park, take a nap.
Right.
And then did we talk about how this material is going to be used? I was out of the room. Did y'all mention how that works?
I
Yeah.
think-
Yeah, it's archival for the municipal archives on record for historical purposes.
Hmm.
That's what, you know, that's what it's all about.
Well, I didn't get into it in our conversation, but we have also from that kind of asset-based place started a community conversation that's developing, and we're working toward developing a master plan for Southside Savannah. We got local government at the table and nonprofits and community members and various sectors. We're looking to find some business leaders, so that's in the works as well. You know, kind of out of the inertia of all these things. So glad to be caught up in that too. And the church has been supportive of those type of conversations.
So, and that comes from the asset mapping, right? I mean, you start looking closely, and once you get focused and looking closely like that, using the asset mapping, then you begin to wonder what could be, and opportunities. How do we make these opportunities happen? We need partners. We need buy-in, and that's how that begins to emerge.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, opportunities, held together with the Hyundai plant coming in, with development in downtown, with all these other contributing things already affecting South Side so precipitously, so actively, change is happening to us, and folks really need the place to be able to have a voice on what change could and should look like for people who live and work on South Side.
So this is community organizing now.
Yeah.
I mean, you really are straight on doing community organizing.
Yes.
Yeah, got it. That's really interesting. Would Pastor Robertson be connected? Is he? 'Cause
He
I
is,
saw
yeah.
y'all the other day. And
Yeah.
we were
That's
sitting
why
there.
we were meeting.
Yeah.
We had the first meeting held at White Bluff Presbyterian. The second meeting was at Kingdom Life at Pastor Roberson's church. The third one was at Crusader Center in Coffee Bluff. And now we've had the fourth meeting, and now we're gaining some very strong momentum. A lot of folks are interested in saying that this is an important time to be having a conversation like this.
Great. Yeah.
So,
Good.
It's interesting how you guys felt it a little earlier
Mm.
than some of the other churches maybe felt it, So that might have helped get you guys, aware faster, it sounds like.
Yeah, and again, I suspect it's, kind of raising our awareness of where we are and where we're located, our neighbors, and really looking to be curious about the dynamics already at work around us, and just coming alongside and seeing what we can create together.
And I would be willing to suggest that Asbury, I mean, in a funny sort of way, they just for different reasons weren't able to get out in front.
Right.
I mean, they held on, but then there was nothing to hold on to except the building, and they couldn't hold on to that because
Yeah.
it's an older building.
Right.
But I mean, downtown has changed. Age
Mhm.
has taken its toll in that congregation as well. And the good news is the building is not the The building is not the congregation.
Right.
So they've been able to find a home.
The building is not the church.
The building
That's
is not the church. So they've been able to find a home with you now, which is great.
Yeah, they're just let us know that they're moving on. There's New Canaan United Methodist Church on off of President Street, near President Street. The pastor there recently retired. They're in the same denomination, so they're looking at possibly seeing what it would be like to combine. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
They have a wonderful minister. She
Yeah.
really is.
Reverend Precious Hawkins.
That's right.
Mhm.
She's got a great name, too.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, perfect name.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, are y'all Savannahans?
Well, Savannah by marriage.
Well, that's the best kind.
By choice, yeah.
Yeah, I was born and raised on Whitfield Avenue.
Oh,
My dog used to chase all the cows over to my house from Bethesda.
yeah. My husband used to have to go through the cow pasture to get to White Bluff Presbyterian from where he lived on on Edgewater Road. And he talked a lot about the bull. And you'd have to, plan it and get there and over the fence before the bull knew you were
Yeah,
there.
that's what we're trying to do in the church too, right?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Avoid the bull. Yeah.
That's good. Right. I'd like to let y'all get out of here because I know the traffic is going to be a bother. No way.
I may need